It's good to be with you all. Thank you for having me. And I appreciate the funny comment about the PwC partner piece. Our experience at Diamond, where we were wholly acquired in 2010, and it's kind of a different model. So I decided to go into private practice, or go into corporate practice, and that was a good jump for my family at the time. Was the other reason, was just getting off the road, so to speak. But so I wanted to, the talk today is largely about obviously the future of advisory services, this sort of special additional, almost like the cream of the crop of the professional services, which is that extra layer of oomph that firms like yourselves, global leaders, bring. I want to talk a little bit about the extreme forces of disruption, of which you're no doubt aware, but also just kind of the intersection of those forces increasingly as we unfold in this fourth industrial revolution. And then also just some go-to-market strategies, the heart of it really. So I'll work through the first third and even 2/3 a little more quickly, but by all means stop if anything is particularly interesting. And we'll spend a little more time on that last piece, because that's where, given some of the strategic moves BDO has made, it might be interesting to talk about how you're looking forward and what challenges you are facing as you think strategically about how to move forward with so many forces at work in the marketplace. So I want to also impress upon you that I appreciate your position. I spent as much of my professional life in professional services as I did in just general overall corporate strategy and innovation. So and now that I'm back in private practice, it makes me realize just how important it is to constantly weigh two sets of priorities. Professional services, unlike a lot of other service-oriented companies, really takes into account the customer's business while you're also trying to run a firm. It was important. I know in our firm as Diamond, we grew from a small firm into a still a firm about maybe 1/8 the size of BDO, and before our acquisition, at one time we were maybe a fourth the size, but we then divested our European unit. But I definitely understood the forces at work with just being an advisor. There was the half of the equation of trust, which is obviously the whole equation of getting the relationship and maintaining a relationship. But who do clients trust with which services, and is it worth the rates? It's just the constant battle of going to market. What pricing, the power and difficulty of pricing, but the beauty and the difficulty in trusted relationships, and also the notion of value. How much of the relationship is outsourcing? And that's okay. That's a natural part of going to market, which is they just need the help. The other is liability protection. We need a third party in here to look over our shoulder or to share in the risk of this assessment. This is the first time we've done something like this, says the client. And then also just true value creation, just the synergy of understanding the client's business, going to market with your talent, and truly creating value that was not there before. So I'm keeping these in mind as we move forward in the discussion. As you may have seen or witnessed and realized as your own clients are working through their evolution, is that the age of any company in a leadership position is shrinking. This rolling 7-year average of the age of companies on the S&P 500 always stuck with me. And the notion that even as of 2 years ago, that 75% of the S&P 500 companies will turn over by 2027. It is harder and harder to maintain a leadership position. And we are constantly seeing turnover and across industries. And keeping that in mind, of course, as we think about how to compete and thrive in an ever-changing environment that is also changing right in front of our eyes. So the main thing to consider, usually we talk about trends, and even in insurance, it was, we were looking at trends that were hitting us a few years after they were hitting banks, just the nature of the customer relationships in insurance versus banking, and the degree to which there are fewer transactions in insurance than there are in banking. So we usually could look at financial services and see where our future was going. But now that we can really step back, and experts agree that we're actually in the fourth industrial revolution, this is different than just technology trends. It's different than seeing what's happening in one industry because you can wait and see what's going to happen in yours. And it's happening everywhere all the time. And so the fourth industrial revolution really forces us to think about how to future-proof our actual business model and our go-to-market strategies and our culture. So we'll keep coming back to the culture piece. And I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on that, as I know you've gone through some acquisitions lately. In terms of the fourth industrial revolution, not only is it just not a series of trends, but really a change in the way humans and computers interact. And perhaps what's different about this one, as opposed to just being an extension of the third revolution, is that it's really in everyday lives. The prior revolutions usually affected industry, and then increasingly it would ripple through the economy. But I think we can tell with the amount of smart devices and even gene editing that this next phase is really going to affect everyone, and everyone has decisions to make, let alone corporations, who increasingly have to make social and ethical and economic and civil decisions. We've seen increasingly companies making important statements about who they are and how they interact with the economy because of the political environment we're in. Add to that a series of technologies and how we ethically put them to use, especially AI, and everybody has a seat at the table in terms of thinking critically and strategically about how to put technology to use now and in the future. The good news is there is still time. I appreciate BDO participating in something like this, where you're clearly thirsty and constantly assessing where your place in the market is and should be, and where you want it to be, and how you're going to take it there, which is important. I mean, here you are in the middle of tax season. I know that's not all you do, but you're devoting time to the future, and that's an important leadership position to take, and it's a keen, I think, indicator of the culture, which is thirsty to stay ahead. So embracing technology, but also embracing a culture that embraces change is critical. I put up here, since there was a sub theme of kind of Silicon Valley and advising built into the preface of this talk. I like to put up, if you're going to talk about Silicon Valley and analysis and the future of technology and how it impacts incumbents in stable industries, I love to put up a CB Insights chart. This is kind of the logo shock of who's coming after anyone. This one in particular highlights the financial services startups that are going after small and medium-sized businesses. Now, BDO's clients tend to obviously be larger than the SMBs, but what I like about this kind of chart is SMBs often grow up to be corporations, and these are the firms that are growing up with them. So we increasingly tend to not be able to write off small startups who go after small markets, because those end up being large markets. And as we saw in the S&P 500, the age of companies can only shrink because the companies that are coming to get them started off smaller. So whether it be through acquisition or organic growth, I do like to kind of think about the future of the technologies implied by these smaller startups. I'll pause here just to see if there's anything in particular that's kind of either resonating or where there's a question. Okay, we'll keep pushing ahead through the kind of our setup here.
Eric, apologies, I couldn't reach the mute button
sure.
fast enough. I'd be interested in the context of what you're talking about, and any perspective you have on how innovation is impacted by partners becoming competitors. And let me give an example of that. I mean, we have been a partner with Intuit for many years, around their platforms. I came from our BSO practice. But now Intuit is offering bookkeeping services. Mm-hmm. So I mean, which clearly, I mean, at some point crosses a line. I mean, does it cross the line into our market space? Maybe, maybe not. But I'd be interested in any perspective in that thread that you could offer.
Mm-hmm. This is so. That's I am also similarly fascinated by the notion of partners as competitors or co-opetition. And it is a delicate balance, and it does evolve over time. So what you may find was that, so in Silicon Valley is full of these kind of examples where, Apple and Google will collaborate on one thing, totally compete on another. And then when it gets to a breaking point on a place where the competition, does it break the partnership? So right now, Apple is pushing for the level of security that would allow people to tell Facebook, I don't want you to grab anything about me from any of my movements or on this app or any others, and don't share it with advertisers. And yes, I'll pay the price of having irrelevant ads pushed to me because I won't want to share that information. The degree to which Apple is enabling that and actually almost pushing for that could break future collaborations between the two. Now, I don't know that that's the strongest set of collaborations to talk about versus, let's say, some other ones where even China and the US, we're going to collaborate on climate change, but we to completely compete on trade and human right and bringing human rights in. And does their position on human rights break our ability to partner with them on anything? So I think each one has to be assessed specifically of what are the trade-offs, what are the walls you can divide between the competition and the partnerships, where can you plug in those capabilities from an Intuit that just makes sense for certain go-to-market components, and where can you just kind of turn off communication and create some proper tension in those other areas. So I think it's just a reality moving forward. But we will talk about ecosystems, and I think what could happen is, as BDO considers your mission, vision, and values, you could appeal to something as high order as your values to decide whether Intuit is the partner of choice for anything if they're going to compete with something that becomes so important. Just as an example where you can draw the line.
And I feel like
go ahead.
One of the important topics that we see with some of the clients for whom we provide advisory is exactly that sort of trade-off, and also asking the question. So why do you think the Intuit can compete with you? What is that they offer that you cannot offer? And the question is that once you understand that, is that do you actually want to compete with them on that one, right? So do you actually want to put your efforts to compete with Intuit on some of those bookkeeping services when they come to those SMBs? So that's I think also a very important part, is that what do you actually want to put into your competition, whether you want to pursue that, because the one thing is a risk, but then the other one is, what are you going to do about it? Do you feel threatened enough that you want to put your efforts and compete with them? Or do you want to focus on something that creates the value for your customers and just let it slide and sort of focus on something that is different?
Right, or even, yes, I agree with that, which goes back to the overall strategy of where are your services the core of what you go to market with, and you concede other things, or just partner with them on it. Say, you know what, if they want to get into that business, let's find a way to work with them, because you'll see later we talk about one of the go-to-market strategies that would include how to deal with that. So I'll save that one for later. But very good point. It all goes back to your overall corporate strategy and then your values. So I'm sure we'll keep talking about that. Given the fact that a lot of these smaller entrants are coming and always will be, and that this represents sort of the fourth industrial revolution showing up in lots of different ways. What are the lessons about dealing with revolutions and evolutions and these trends of disruption? There are 5 key. We can go back to the Innovator's Dilemma and works that succeeded that in terms of the major disruptive forces, and I'll just hit on a couple of big ones. Obviously, who controls the resources, the difficulty in being large and growing at the same time, the fact that new markets are difficult to analyze are all important, but I want to focus on these last two, which is once you reach global scale, obviously your capabilities then also sort of define limitations. Just by definition, they represent assets tied up in ways that take a while to shift or adapt. And then also technologies just continue to unfold in a way that's actually hard for the market to absorb. And the difficulty there is then it becomes really about decision-making inside any organization to be, well, which technologies are going to be most important? We have to spend time to test all of these, to understand their impact, to work with customers and understand what they're adopting, or can we get ahead? How can we stay ahead of this? So looking at BDO's aggressive moves in the digital space, clearly you've adopted a stance of you're going to do your best to stay ahead of it, or at least stay in it, in a leading, at least toward this tip of the spear. And that gets difficult and expensive, but it's part of your business model now. So how do you continue to do so in the face of ongoing change? First, we'll touch on this notion of capabilities as liabilities. And then this sets up who are the competitors of the future. So incumbents, and we see this a lot in insurance, and so then I also know in professional services, your key assets of all your technology, does it become legacy issue? Your data, there's almost becomes too much, and how do you swim through it? The services, the culture, which is really difficult in an age of growing inorganically, and then the brand. And then these future competitors, obviously, especially the ones that are digitally native, they believe in analysis and not analysts. You know, how much can we automate and get there faster? AI versus accountants. Just being innately innovative, fresh, and in touch with the brand and culture are hard to replicate, especially with size. So in an effort to grow and compete and have scale comes the difficulty of adaptation. Professional services has always been atop of kind of the data information knowledge pyramid, basically applying that which is really hard to replicate and automate. But increasingly now we're seeing that under threat. And it's because of the nature of these technologies, the explosion of data and computing is really allowing other humans to program these capabilities and just through speed and sheer computing power, try to replicate or automate around professional services. So it's constantly the difficulty, the plight of the advisory firms to stay ahead in that knowledge and wisdom rank. The beauty of doing that while also investing in technology is knowing how to direct technology to be supportive as opposed to simply automating away the special sauce. And that's just the plight of humans. So this can translate well into just the overall culture of we'll start with the US, who is still ahead in a lot of these things, but obviously dealing with competitors across the globe, is how can humans stay ahead of the singularity where supposedly artificial intelligence will reach the level of human intelligence and then can surpass it because of the computing capability. Can we stay ahead of that? So we're not there yet. Supposedly we still got 20, 25, 30 years, but everything we do in a microcosm around advisory service, professional services is dealing with that frontier of people over machines. Corporate executives are waking up to this, obviously. This Microsoft study shows, high percentages where executives recognize that these tools are coming for professional services. The good news here is this generally speaks to supporting and helping. So workflows and tools, productivity, helping with the creative process. Those are all the positive upsides. Now in accounting, you're probably familiar with this study that talks about 90% of accountants feeling that accountancy is leaning way more towards technology adoption than it ever used to. And that, of course, has led to the governing institutions in the industry rethinking the CPA licensure process and protocols and requirements. It's getting to where there's so much technology. Obviously, decision-making for the younger analysts and managers is where partners used to be probably 30 years ago. Is what some of the literature speaks to, and what I did experience in consulting as well. So now even to get a CPA, you have to specialize. There's obviously minimum requirements for everyone, but then just admitting that there's too much information for everyone to have the same licensing process. So that's a critical realization, and hopefully it's in time to allow for the next wave of CPAs to do what they need to do to get ready and compete. So the key firms, this particular Forbes article speaks to accountants and lawyers, but I would say the same for consultants, which is that it's time to start cannibalizing your own industry. So that example of Intuit, clearly BDO and anyone else is going to be very expensive and difficult to develop all your own technologies. So inevitably you're dealing with a competitive landscape. If there's a way to understand how to apply that on behalf of your clients and cannibalize, or direct your own future, even if to the degree it leads to cannibalization, then at least you're deciding your own future. This is a very difficult thing for incumbent firms to do, but it becomes part of the conversation and how you go to market. And in so doing, you're less worried about cannibalization and more about creating the future market. So The difficulty with advisory layers and things like accountants and consultants is you are always expected to have the right advice. And moreover, you're expected to heed that advice. As soon as clients have difficulty seeing that you're putting the practices you're coaching them on into practice for yourselves, makes it harder for them to work with you. Now that it's a kind of fallacy of reasoning, because even if a smoker tells you not to smoke, they're right. It doesn't mean that they've had to stop for their message to be clear and correct. So throwing out the messenger because they're having trouble following their own advice doesn't mean the advice isn't sound. But increasingly, it's incumbent upon advisory firms to stay ahead, not only in what they're suggesting and coaching, but what they're doing, what they're proving out. And we'll see again, one of the go-to-market strategies helps address this. It's just at what cost? So obviously, again, competing and leading requires a constant vigilance on the successive trends that keeps advisory firms advising. So now we'll get into the heart of the kind of the 4 strategies that highlight this. And in a way, I feel BDO has probably done some or all of versions of these. And so I'd be curious your thoughts on which one you think you're orienting towards, or if it's something else. So becoming a relationship master, a segment specialist, a technology leader, or an ecosystem pioneer. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these. Relationship master is when a firm targets obviously the high value, high margin, the relationships that feature people and relationships in history. Obviously, to be at this level, both firms are hiring and cultivating talent. They're staying at the top of the regulatory game. They're staying on the cutting edge of usually products and services that are kind of innovative and leading. You think of the top firms and the top banks and the top corporations here. Who doesn't want those? Clearly, that's a cherry picking process. But given the difficulty of relationships and maintaining these it's a difficult strategy to only concentrate on. Segment specialists are profiling, and I'm putting a special edge on this one. This isn't just finding a nice segment and targeting and positioning and going to market. It's adding an extra layer of this technology component in an age of evolution and revolution is who's marching down the field at about the same rate as you are. Places where you can stay a little ahead of them, and maybe places where they challenge you to do the same. But you are culturally and technically matched as well. So it's not just a segment that you know because you've done all the regulatory work, the tax and audit and accounting work, and you know those industries, but also those particular clients within those industries feel and look and thrive and value the same things. Next is a technology leader, where again, some of BDO's recent investments speak to a movement here, which is you're looking to reach the highest level of expertise in technology and becoming a leader in that for clients, adding that to the suite of services. No longer is it just the professional services, it has a whole technology component that makes that suite of services possible and actually becomes its own suite of services. And then there's the ecosystem pioneer, where recognizing that last one, especially the technology leader approach, is really expensive and difficult. How can you find those Intuits and others out there where you see them as trusted partners and they help you go to market? They help you innovate products and services. They become part of your virtual or real platform, and they become part of your go-to-market solutions with whom you work on developing client solutions. So I'll pause there and see what your thoughts are on these, if you think it's a mix of all of them, or if you see yourselves in one of these.
I'm not seeing anybody else come off mute, so I'll give I do see, just thinking through examples, I see all of these, I think, in various ways across different practices. Jeff mentioned in the certain components of the advisory practice that Jeff and Kristen work with and lead, definitely on the ecosystem pieces for sure, and partnerships with our digital practice as well. And certainly kind of in line with that on the digital practice and some of the acquisitions made over the past year or two. Yep. Curious if anybody's got any thoughts that maybe me just not being practice or client facing rather on the relationship master, even the segment specialist.
You know, Ben, I'll join you from a non-client facing perspective, but I think I would agree with you. I think we're probably still very heavy in the upper left-hand corner of that with the relationship master. But I think there are elements of each of the other three that we have begun to make inroads into. That's how I would see it.
Good. It's good because it's kind of a potentially trick question in a way. And not really. So part of one of my having worked in corporate strategy a long time, it was always be clear on what you don't want to be or can't be or are not going to be, you choose not to be, because it helps you focus. So while I'm not saying be all these things all the time, but I do believe that lower right-hand corner is a way to test your way into the future. So typically we're faced with kind of the buy, build, partner paradigm. I like this particular framework because it brings in the two most critical components to any strategy. Isn't just kind of analyzing and figuring out what to do and marching forward, but it's the talent. Do you have the talent? And then what do you have the culture? Because that old famous quote of culture eats strategy for breakfast. So
Mark, I think that we had one more comment
towards
the previous slide that went unanswered. So Winforked, I'm not sure who that is, but I saw you turn on your camera and went on mute. So if you want to add to the previous slide, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. I just turned it on because I thought Ben was calling me out. So Merrick, as Ben mentioned, Jeff Clark and I work very closely with our advisory business, and we're actually in the process of rolling out the next iteration of our strategic plan. I would say that we are really focused on relationship master, technology leader, and ecosystem pioneer. Segment specialist, probably not so much. And I think on the technology leader bucket specifically, yes, BDO Digital is leading the way in a lot of those things, and also with the ecosystem pioneer, but it's really taking all of our practices who may or may not have a technology bent in the services they offer, but getting them to leverage technology in a way that they probably have not historically. So whether that is harnessing the intellectual property that they sit on and using that to help our clients make real-time data-driven decisions, or leveraging technology to make their client service deliverable process optimized. That's really the challenge that we've put in front of all of our practice leaders. And so I think those three, Jeff, weigh in and disagree with me, but I think those three are probably where we're placing our bets. That's not to say at some point we wouldn't look at more of a segment specialism, but right now it's really in those three.
I think you hit it, Kristen, and to that end, we really have to challenge the ways that we engage with and use technology, and how we get that in the hands of our users in order to deliver.
Excellent, thank you for that, and thanks, Vlas, for catching. I can't see all the screens at the same time, so that's great. Appreciate that. That's really good. So thank you for those comments and that insight, because there isn't always one crisp and clean answer, and so. What we introduce next is, as I said, this buy, build, partner framework is useful and interesting. That upper right-hand corner is always an interesting corner, which talks about any. And I would add to this old framework then is kind of this, obviously there's pluses and minuses to any of these, and they're all pretty well understood. But it's this test and learn notion and the ecosystem approach, because increasingly, when I graduated from management consulting into running corporate strategy, and then having to add innovation as a formal function and even division, and then launching new businesses, whether they were going to cannibalize us or just add to new capabilities. The testing and learning was obviously the clear way in to fail fast and avoid over investment in bad ideas that you didn't know were bad yet, but you find out sooner than you used to. And the other is that the ecosystem approach helps you find your way in. Maybe you work with partners, and then later you can acquire them because it's a known quantity, or you don't have to because you figured out such a useful way to innovate together. partners can be switched out faster than having to buy or build something that you spent years on. So ecosystems are becoming, even for folks who themselves are in an ecosystem, they leverage ecosystems, and I'll talk about a case study here in a second. So what I was going to say though about that strategy moving into innovation was that increasingly I found the strategic planning process was really about an innovation process. We no longer went and did months of analysis and kind of a voila of strategy and then unveil it to the whole company, unless and until it also included obvious ways in which we were assuming already it would adapt. So we had a series of unknowns in the strategy. The mission, the vision, the values, the customer focus were clear, but the exact how we were going to proceed were a little less than clear in certain areas, the further out, especially the further out you went. That used to be very difficult for strategy. Strategy used to have to put down a roadmap and a business case. And if you deviated from the roadmap, it was usually a change request, and it was usually a bad thing. It was a budget problem. It was a, why didn't you see this before? Well, we couldn't see it before. And finally, strategy admitted that. And execution became really critical because execution allowed the strategy to evolve. You have to have a living strategy through these things. So ecosystems are a great way to have a living strategy. It's not hedging all bets and having no direction, but it is about going to market with a series of partners who help you be more flexible and also harder to replace. So an example is a tech company. It's an insurtech company based in Chicago. You might have heard of them. It's called Snapsheet. Actually, that's the next slide, but this is just an illustration on ecosystems becoming their own platform. And platforms can be really expensive and difficult, so ecosystems are a better way to approach those. And you can have a different platform for different services, but you want to probably limit how many platforms you refer to for clients. But essentially, if this is a value chain, plugging in the folks who help you, everything from research and staying ahead of new products and services, especially in, I know regulatory tech is a whole cottage industry, customer analytics, deep customer data analysis and collaboration becoming its own cottage industry, helping with product development and services and pricing, the whole go-to-market approach, the whole sales pipeline, all of customer relationship management. Obviously, you're developing partnerships with companies in order to even do these things. And so the idea is then, can you take those partnerships and bring them to market? I'll get into my case study then, and then we can pause one last time. So Snapsheet is a company that launched on the scene about a decade ago and has jumped into a nice 9-digit valuation. They help automate claims for auto and eventually now home for personal lines insurance. They're everything from allowing people to take pictures of an incident and have that become immediate workflow into these age-old insurance companies where workflow either doesn't exist or is certainly not integrated with the outside world and certainly isn't integrated with people's phones for all of the kind of scary regulatory and compliance issues, let alone the technology ones. But they help make it possible. And what they see is even they see themselves as an ecosystem player. They're not just becoming part of their client's ecosystem, they have their own ecosystem that they have to build and contend with in order to be more relevant to clients. And that involves a whole partnership ecosystem lifecycle. And of course, the beloved API strategy. So they see APIs and they essentially want to turn a claim into a living piece of work. And the claim decides where it needs to go based on the more data that it absorbs, and it navigates its way intelligently through a series of steps with the insured, the insurance company, and obviously the various providers that are helping provide information along the way. So I'll pause there before we get to our last slide, which talks a little bit more about culture. Any thoughts here on this ecosystem approach, and how do you see yourselves in terms of what your digital practice especially, is that translating into products and services that you bring to market for more than one client?
Hi, it's Kristen again. Yes, I definitely think it is. I mean, the fact that we are able to collaborate across business line, leveraging technology to answer complex business issues, and in some instances, the client's even saying, "Help us identify what the issue is. We don't know it, and then help us solve it." And so again, when we talk about really trying to drive technology into the practices, some of them have solely been time and materials, and it's been very much based on the expert or the services or the knowledge model. So now that we're talking about the technology and how how we interact with the customer and how the customer interacts with us, we definitely see a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing, the project I worked most recently, Jamie's someone I worked with back in consulting in Diamond and PwC, but when he left to help run Snapsheet, the work I ended up doing for them was around the customer journey analysis. And the beautiful thing is it wasn't their customers' journey we were analyzing deeply, it was the end users. It was more of a B2B2C. So Snapsheet's go-to-market approach isn't just to know their clients' industries insanely well. It's to recognize the plight of their customers' customers to the point where we're journey mapping in crazy detail and presenting all of the competitors that are going after that space. So, and I recognize in professional services, that's probably something along the lines of which you have done. So to see a startup doing that, bringing those age-old advisory lessons into the startup world, I thought was fascinating. And it's really helping them win more and more client work. Which obviously results into really stabilizing the future of a startup and allows them to become a powerhouse.
Yeah, and I think one more thing I would add here about ecosystem, right? I think it's kind of going back to this Intuit example, right? Is that, are you willing to play that game, right? Do you actually want to spend your time on trying to play that game, or do you want to, yes, let your client go maybe to the sister company or the partner company, but nevertheless, you keep the whole narrative, right? You might be doing 70% of the things, and then 30% of the things you still control in that relationship, right? So when we're talking about that relationship building, if you're a provider of the qualified services, if you can recommend and you can manage some of those requirements and some of those pain points, it is still your relationship, despite the fact that they might be working with a completely different company. But if it's kind of under your umbrella and under your guidance, you're still building that relationship, you're still building that trust, even though you're not the one who actually doing the work.
Yep. And having a framework like this one, or whichever one you're using now, but that it includes those kinds of key decisions about what are the trade-off points, where's the real value, scoring these opportunities will help you decide which decision to make, and having a scorecard that's reviewed, periodically to make sure. But it just helps in the decision-making process, makes things faster. So lastly, I'll talk about a book by Soren Kaplan. This is this is more of a reference book. It's really a quick read. It's full of case studies, but Soren helped us set up our innovation unit, which has since launched businesses when I was at CSAA. And it just speaks to culture. You no doubt wrestle with this, as part of recruiting and cultivating talent and retaining talent. Obviously, culture is very critical. And as you've absorbed new firms into BDO, you're probably wrestling with what is our culture and are we getting everything we can out of it, or which pieces do we need around the edges to improve, or are there some other major overhauls in certain areas? But it truly is the true unique and competitive advantage, and having a thirsty culture going after new technologies and embracing change and collaborating with partners and clients is irreplaceable. So I always like to end on the people piece. So with that, I'd just take any questions or further discussion points, or anything we didn't cover that where any of my experiences might be helpful.
Eric, would you maybe mind digging in a little bit more on that piece? You mentioned launching kind of an innovation spin-off or more formal program, and just talk a little bit more about what that actually looked like and what the thinking was and what the kind of measurements of success were, and how did you balance the risk, so to speak, and measure the reward?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. We did put some thought into it. When we worked with Soren, for example, one of the first things we did was, I'll step back to 2014, 15 was the strategy itself called to be more innovative. We knew that in order to just compete and succeed, constantly having some capability. So we looked at innovation as three different things. One was sustainable, sustaining daily innovation. One was kind of product, more robust innovation, kind of new value creation, sort of new territory, maybe new customers, new products. Then there was breakthrough or disruptive innovation. And we looked at our organization and we thought, well, we don't have anybody teed up against disruptive. We got sustaining, we got some value, we got some process improvement initiatives, probably do better, and we knew we could. And in product improvement, we had a team dedicated to customer insights in the product area, but we didn't have anybody saying, well, what are the new businesses of the future? So that's where I took the corporate development team from finance and my own strategy team, and we put them together and we launched a venture investing capability, because that lets us sense the market and also get upside from other people's capabilities and start to work towards that ecosystem. We're actually investing in these companies. And then a partnerships piece, a more formal partnerships piece. So strategy, partnerships, venture investing, and then innovation. The innovation group, when we did the design work with Soren, he brought to us a series of different models. And his main thing was get innovation and get strategy out of a division. Right now, I was in marketing at the time, and corporate development was in finance. So we took them both and got them out of those divisions and put them directly reporting to the CEO. That freed them up from some of the operational metrics. And
quick point of elaboration. My question was going to be, I mean, how were these structured? Where did they sit? So it sounds like you decided to carve them out. Was that so that they could focus, or so that they had a different mandate, if you will?
Both. If they're stuck inside another division, they'll be beholden to the head of that division's metrics and constantly be told, I don't see any revenue there, stop it. It's not worth the money. I don't see the return, because just that the time horizons are so different. So we had to get them out and then allow the CEO to make some decisions, obviously with collaboration from that other division leaders or the board. It depends on what was going on. But yeah, so that was sorry if it took me a little while to get there, but that was the main organizational imperative, was get it out of the other divisions, have its own set of metrics. And so the metrics went back to innovative principles, which are, is whatever idea you're working on resonating with actual clients, whether current clients or future clients? Is this resonating? And just go through that basic, the customer problem fit. Is there something here? Is there a real problem? Is the customer willing to trade value for you to solve that problem? How big is this problem? And working through those innovative cycles. So there's some well understood innovation cycles. I didn't include those slides today, but essentially customer empathy, trial, sort of test and learn, and then customer solution fit, and then product market fit. And if you allow a unit to work through those processes, they'll come back with results, as long as you're constantly keeping the customer first. And you can be very vigilant around metrics. They just don't start with dollars right away. But you got to get them out of the other divisions to let that happen. So, and then we were able to launch new businesses. We launched an app that actually matched roommates with properties, because property developers were having a hard time filling 2-bedroom units in expensive cities like San Francisco. And especially in New York, these buildings were going up, but people who come to those cities to work for companies tend to come alone. And then it's hard for them to meet people. Well, the app essentially matched people through their LinkedIn and Facebook profiles and found commonalities, essentially with where you went to school or where you're from or common interests. Then later, between both sides putting in either who they were, are you a pet lover or a smoker? Do you stay up late? Versus what kind of unit are you looking for? This neighborhood, that neighborhood, this kind of features and this kind of cost. And you took all those things and it matched roommates, and then they could go find properties together. Just an example, something we never would have, no insurance company would have spent money on that, but it was resonating because we were free to test it. It started with walking around a park and talking to people with a clipboard. And we were testing a different idea, but we went 50 for 50 on it. Turns out they said their biggest problem was finding a roommate in the first place. So just an example of finding something new and interesting that's totally unrelated to what your core business is, but that has success, because later we distributed renters insurance through that app to a market we were underserving, which was millennials. So great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let me just summarize a little bit by just saying I'm impressed with so much of what you're doing, and you didn't need me to tell you that, but it really is, I think, between the commitments you've made in the digital space, your commitment to constantly engaging different folks for sort of sessions like this, it just shows that you're keeping that, as all the leaders of the biggest companies and leading investors say, you got to keep your leaders at thinking at least a quarter of their time or a third of their time, or maybe even half their time in the future. And so you're clearly doing that, and that's a testament to, I think, your competitive positioning.
Yeah,
So,
Mark, I think we have a couple more questions going on. I see that the people going off mute.
okay.
So I'm not sure who that is, but I see the MoCM is off mute. So please go ahead.
That's me, but I have my my speaker on mute rather than the screen on mute. So nothing to add.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Okay, awesome. So do you have any last minute questions for Mark? So maybe a question from me, and maybe going to that problems and that slide from the CB Insights that you have shown. So you have shown some of those companies that are trying to address those SMB issues and trying to solve some of those problems in that space. So what do you think is the problem that they're trying to solve that big companies are currently not addressing? Why do you think that those startups are getting that funding, that getting that traction? What do you think is sort of their competitive advantage there?
Well, they're growing up organically. They're right in at the heart. Typically, these startups, if they found the kind of traction to even show up on a slide like this, means they've gone through a couple rounds of fundraising. Doesn't mean they'll survive for sure. Doesn't mean they won't get acquired or fizzle. But they found the customer. They found the customer problem is compelling enough to go to market, which is they've automated something that cost too much to do before. They're serving companies with a lean cost structure who need to solve a back office issue in a cost effective manner, especially an automated manner. They serve smaller companies who don't have a lot of personnel to deal with these things, and they found a way to automate something that was just process or data intensive. They typically, I mean, the DNA of a small company who's right in the middle of something really specific is that they are really close to customers, and they're really close to the problem, and they've now developed they can make an entire living out of solving that problem. So that's really hard to mimic because that's all they're doing, and that's why they're everywhere. That's why it's sort of like I hope it's an apt, but it's sort of death by a thousand cuts. It's sort of like the Lilliputians, and there's just so many little things and little problems to solve, and someone can make an entire living out of all of that. It's one of the more reasons that ecosystems make sense. Our economy is increasingly complex, and to be a big global firm and try to tackle all of these problems, it's impossible. So some of them you could concede, those are too small a problem. We've known about that problem. Either the client's too small, or the problem's too small, or we're not too worried about it. But the trick is just at least making sure to stay abreast of these things and make sure that those small problems don't grow up to be the big problems that actually pull the business that direction, or the constellation of a series of these smaller players in mass is enough to take the business away. So for instance, you might remember Craigslist. I mean, it's still out there. You could go to Craigslist for anything. But now every part of Craigslist has been picked off by another app that is only going after that subset of Craigslist, whether it was real estate or selling items out of your home or selling your old clothes, or I mean, everything now has an app. So eventually the Craigslists go away and becomes the atomization of work, but there's still a place for scale. So it's finding that balance, I think, between scale and atomization, and just representing, understanding where you are vis-a-vis these little guys.
Yeah, and that's I think something that we keep seeing with some of our clients, that some of them actually request that intelligence, right? Is saying, okay, what are the seed companies that in our space right now that receive the financing, and what themes receive the most financing in seed? If we are looking into what is kind of becoming, if we look into the Series A, Series B, that's the companies who getting more traction, therefore more dangerous, right? But I think that, but understanding that intelligence and keeping an eye on where the venture capital, where the Silicon Valley can invest its money and time can prove extremely beneficial, because it can actually show you where your next competitors might be coming in. And then you have all of those millions of dollars being put in by the venture capital investors of trying to go over that market, and they thinking that there is a potential. And obviously, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but in our experience, that the venture capital usually never focuses on the immediate need and immediate problem. They kind of see, yes, right now we're addressing those small enterprises, but we're really trying to see the strategy, how to go against the big guys with the big deep pockets. Is it something that you saw as well, or do you think it's something different?
There definitely has to be, it's kind of like the Goldilocks situation, where the market size has to be big enough to take that risk. So if it's too big, it looks like you're going after the world. If it's too small, I maybe go down the street and find go get a business loan. But so it has to be the right size of market potential that a venture capital VC is going to get the kind of returns that they expect, and in a time horizon they expect. So you're correct that it has to be bigger than the problem they're solving today. So traction, when you're usually doing a pitch, traction is a very key component of, we know right now this is the problem we're solving and people are paying us for it. But what else, what's the horizon look like, and where are you going with this? What's the bigger picture? Is that problem actually big enough? So I agree that it has to be a big enough problem to go after. Also, I agree with you on, and this is maybe a position BDO has already considered or could consider with your investments in the digital realm, is exactly that, Laz, what you just mentioned, that visibility into the world. Your clients are probably wondering, well, who should I choose to automate X, Y, and Z? Well, guess what? We have a dashboard. We actually look at who the leading competitors are. We've done a capability analysis, and we can also tell you who's raising what money. It's actually a platform service that we offer. It's a subscription, and we can actually embed that into our relationship this year. It's either a value add, because you're doing it anyway, and you're just exposing it to your clients, or it's a subscription service you could add as an additional fee. But you're probably doing a lot of that work. It's just, do you want to share it with your clients, or are you already?
Perfect. All right. Any last minute questions before our short break? All right.
Thank you.
Well, true to our kickoff, we're going to end it 5 minutes early, so everybody can be on time for the next thing.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark, so much. Thank you.
Thanks.